Greetings, global gardeners. And welcome to a chilly, snowy kind of Monday here in Colorado. I've been looking at the comments, and a lot of you are also enjoying chilly, cool conditions, sometimes with a little bit of snow, sometimes without. The weather has definitely changed here. In fact, it's changing in a lot of areas in the Northern Hemisphere as winter approaches in just about 3 weeks. And Eli and I were chatting a couple days ago from Eli and Kate in the garden. And she and I are weather geeks. We love tracking the weather in our gardens. It's as simple as that. And as we were comparing our weather between Scotland and Colorado and talking about the snow that was on the way for me and that had already appeared for her, I thought this is a great topic to discuss at this time of year. Whether you are approaching your summer or you're approaching your winter, weather plays a big factor in our gardens. And what you do about the weather is open to interpretation. Many gardeners, particularly new gardeners, particularly if you move into a new house, spend time just figuring things out. And the weather is one of those things that just happens. And sometimes it can be devastating. But when you become a weather geek, you see it coming. You are more aware of the weather patterns in your garden, and you're more aware of forecasting and how you can use it to benefit your gardening activities. So I thought, let's talk about those kind of factors in our gardening: the forecasting, the interpretation, the record keeping, all the things that are related to weather in our garden. So that'll be the underlying theme today. Of course, I'll be answering your questions along the way. I look forward to hearing from any of you who also might consider yourselves to be weather geeks and what that really means. And so let's go ahead and start with a basic weather geek interpretation. If you track your weather on a weekly basis, you're interested in your weather. But if you're tracking your weather on a daily basis, even an hourly basis, then you start venturing into the weather geek category. I actually have 2 weather stations in my garden. That's where the geekiness also begins to show itself. So I see what is happening with the weather in forms of precipitation, sunlight, temperature, humidity, UV radiation. These are all the kind of things that a weather station can tell you. Now, you don't need to have a weather station in your garden to consider yourself a weather geek and to actually help improve your gardening situation by being aware of the weather. But it helps. And the reason I encourage having a weather station in your garden is because the National Weather Service here in the United States, and each country has their equivalent that monitors the meteorological conditions within your country. The National Weather Service has stations all around the country. And sometimes the stations are near you, and most often the stations are going to be at a minimum a few miles away and possibly a number of miles away. So when you look at your news or read your newspaper or get online to see what the National Weather Service is saying, those conditions may not be at all like the conditions that you have in your own garden. But if you have a weather station in your garden, you have accurate, precise, and the kind of data that is actually happening in your garden. One of my weather stations is right next to my raspberries in the middle of the garden. My other weather station is about 50 feet away near my vegetable garden area. And I can compare those 2 readings, and most often they're very, very close. But you'd be surprised at how readings will differ just within your garden space. One of my stations, the one by the raspberries, is mounted about 6 feet high, about 2 meters high. The other one is at the top of my garden shed. It's about 15 feet high. I get different readings, particularly with the wind, because of the elevation of my weather stations. And it's interesting to be able to compare how the wind at the surface is different than the wind just a few feet above that. That's where the geek factor comes into play, is monitoring those kinds of differences, as well as the temperature. Cool air sinks, and so it's probably no surprise that a weather station, a thermometer that is lower to the ground, will have a cooler temperature than one that's a little bit higher up. When you start measuring those kind of things and you start noticing trends within your garden, now you're well on your way to becoming a weather geek. And that's the piece that I think is really important, is looking for the trends that are happening within your own garden. And that way you can enjoy the fruits of your labor by figuring out when the best time is to get out in your garden. And you can determine what activities you're going to do based on the actual weather that's happening. Maureen is saying, I love the weather no matter what it is. Took the class. I've been a weather watcher for years. Good for you. And watching the weather, I've done that for years and years and years. When I was flying in the Air Force, of course, we would get a weather forecast before every single flight. We knew what to expect throughout the flight, where we were going, different altitudes. And I learned that that information can be very important, particularly if you're flying an airplane through weather systems. But when it got closer to home and I got to know the weather forecasters that worked in my unit at the Air Force Academy, it was fun. It was actually fun talking about the weather. Now, we all, of course, enjoy talking about gardening. When you can add that other component into it, what do people talk about when they get together? What's one of the first things that we use to strike up a conversation? It's the weather, of course. So combining weather and gardening, the potential is there to have a conversation with a virtual stranger for hours if they have those same interests. And adding weather to the mix of our gardening toolbox, I think, is one of those things where you can really take your gardening to another level by being able to talk the specifics, the microclimates within your own garden space. And by monitoring what's happening, we've talked recently about sun and shade and the changing seasons. Well, now we start looking at the overall weather patterns associated with those seasonal changes. It helps, particularly for me, in determining what I'm going to do. I've got snow on the ground right now. Last night was our first measurable snowfall, and so it's covering my garden. This is going to influence the activities that I still have to do outside. I still have some garden cleanup, but are you the kind of person that stays in on a snowy day, or are you the kind of person that goes out on a snowy day? Knowing that the snow is coming can influence your decisions. And that's what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks, is trying to get stuff done, knowing, looking at the long range forecast, that these kind of cold conditions and snow was coming. So I'll still get out in the snow. My dogs are out in the snow. I've got footprints all over the snow. My footprints, their footprints. Here in Colorado, you typically don't stay indoors just because it's snowy. It's still sunny. It actually feels pretty warm. But when I check my weather station, I can see that this morning when I got up, it was 18 degrees. That's about -8 Celsius. And it'll be warming up through the day. It's still going to be chilly. Temperatures aren't going to get much above freezing, but I can determine what time of day I'm going to go outside, when the peak is. When we have a weather station like this, and the two that I have, it's interesting, and I encourage that you do some research if you're interested in getting a weather station. I've got a link to Tempest. That's the one that I like best. I consider it more accurate and it gives a lot more information. But one of the nice things about having the newer models of weather stations is it keeps track of the data for you. So if you were wondering what the cold temperature was yesterday, you just go to your app and open it up and you'll know hour by hour what the temperature readings were or what the humidity readings were or any of those other factors that are included in a typical garden weather station. And you can look for those kind of trends in your garden. Now, I've noticed over the course of the last few years since I put the weather stations in place that there is a difference between the two, and the Tempest is more accurate. I've been noticing in this last few days when we've gotten very, very cold, I got down to 11 degrees Fahrenheit, just about 11 and minus 11.5 Celsius. It was cold. The one weather station showed substantially colder than that. And this is where it helps to have the more than one option to compare, because I was shocked at how cold it got. But then when I compared my Tempest weather station data to the National Weather Service data, which has a station, I think they're about 8 miles away from me, I was able to calibrate that, yes, my Tempest was much more accurate, much more in line with the actual conditions. And so that's the one that I'm relying on most in determining just exactly how cold the weather got in my area. And as the days get colder, as the winter approaches, the thing I'm looking for is the coldest temperature. I talk about the hardiness zones all the time, and the hardiness zone is based on the average lowest winter temperature. And so here for me in Colorado, in my zone 5B garden, the average lowest temperature is around minus 15 Fahrenheit, about minus 26 Celsius. That's holding pretty accurately. Even though many of us are seeing warming trends, and the most recent update to the USDA hardiness zone map increased many areas, my specific area didn't change. A couple miles away from me, it changed, but my garden officially didn't change zones. Last year, I had a temperature reading of minus 14 Fahrenheit, about minus 25 Celsius, right there in that zone 5B. The year before, pretty much the same. The year before, pretty much the same. So even though I'm noticing overall trends where the year as a whole is getting warmer, that single coldest day in winter really hasn't changed. So what it tells me as a gardener and as a weather geek, when I start noticing the trends and the patterns of the cold in winter, it's usually just one day. One day in the winter gets that cold. So last year, for the most part, I rarely saw temperatures below 0 degrees Fahrenheit, about minus 18 Celsius. Rarely saw it that cold. And then we had one Arctic front come through that dropped the temperature for a single night down to the level that makes my garden a zone 5B. So if I have plants in my garden that are not as hardy, that maybe can't handle the extreme cold, what I'm learning over the course of the last 5 years in particular is I could gamble a little bit. I could experiment by putting some plants in, like zone 6 plants, maybe even zone 7 plants. And if I just cover those plants, just protect them for that one night of the year when the temperatures get that cold, conceivably, I could be growing new plants in my garden that I wouldn't otherwise choose because they don't match my hardiness zone. So this is where the geek factor really becomes prevalent. How far down this rabbit hole do you want to go, and how much effort do you want to take to be able to garden a little more energetically and experimentally. And the weather station and monitoring these kind of conditions, I think, could be one of those things that you might enjoy about gardening. Janet says Central Texas finally got down to the 40s Fahrenheit, put a heater on and layers, including sometimes a cat. Moving next year, several states north and west. So a year from now, expect snow. Several years lived in New Hampshire. Yeah, I lived in Maine for a number of years, just north of New Hampshire. And you definitely get used to the snow and the cold in wintertime, and enjoy the cold that you have. We've been having ups and downs with our temperatures, and the 40s Fahrenheit, which is about 4.5 degrees Celsius, is where we're sitting right now for our high daytime temperatures. But you never know. I've been outside in December and gotten a lot of gardening done, because again, I look at the forecast and I see a warming trend coming, and it'll be warm enough to melt the snow, be warm enough to work outside. And a week in December here in Colorado can actually be beautiful and perfect for getting some of those fall activities done that you didn't get to before the weather changed. So I definitely encourage that you look into that. Dusty Flats says my temperature fob goes offline a lot when it's too cold. We put a brooder lamp in there on a switch, ordered a different fob, and hope that is a stronger signal. And so that is the kind of weather station that I talk about, and the one that I encourage is the type that is remote, that is a signal. And you do have to be aware of the temperature variations and what the transmitters can handle and what they can't handle. And I think it's great to be able to tie in a weather system to your reading, whatever kind of display you might have, or you might use your phone. So you can sit indoors and see what's happening in your garden. I do a lot of that. I've got the one weather station on my phone. I have the other weather station that actually has a remote display, and I can just sit in my chair reading a seed catalog and look up and know exactly what's happening in my garden at that time. I also have not full-fledged weather stations, but remote thermometers, transmitting thermometers in my greenhouse, so that I can see what's happening when I get up in the morning, how cold my greenhouse is. I can monitor it over the course of the day. So particularly in the summer, I'll often get up and the first thing I do is open up my greenhouse, ventilate it to keep it a little bit cooler as the sun comes up. But there are days I don't get to it because I can look at the thermometer and say, it's not hot enough yet. And as the temperature starts climbing, I'm remembering, hopefully, to look at those readouts. And when the temperature gets high enough, I go outside and open up the ventilation in my greenhouse. So these are the kind of things that you can definitely incorporate into your daily gardening activities. And I don't want to say it's a waste of time to go out too early to open my greenhouse, but I don't need to go out as early as I sometimes choose to do. And it's also easy to make that decision not to. Just have another cup of tea and not be in such a rush to get out into the garden. Some of the, like the Tempest, for instance, is just an incredible weather station. It's solid state, no moving parts. It's all electronic. It's incredible. But you can also tie it into a smart home. And this, I don't do this, but if you have a garage door opener that is tied in through Bluetooth in your home network, you can tie in your weather station to your home network, and they can talk to each other. And so when I was learning how to use the Tempest, I thought it was amazing that it can control your garage door opener. And so if there's, like in my area, we have the afternoon thunderstorms. If the wind increases, if there's rain, you can actually program your weather station to close your garage door. How crazy is that? You can also, depending on if you have automatic watering systems that also might be tied into your smart home, you can set up your home weather station like a Tempest to either turn on your sprinklers or turn off your sprinklers if there's rain in the forecast. Now, I love getting out in the garden and I love the hands-on approach, but if you are a little more limited in your time and you want to try to automate things a little bit more, imagine your whole garden being run by an automatic weather system. And all you do is program it, and it determines when it needs to water. And it determines the other factors, like you could conceivably tie it into a ventilation system in your greenhouse and open and close the vents. So it's just crazy the potential that is being developed for some of these weather systems. And I'm just geeking out and continuing to dive deep into some of these factors. Shandy's Garden says, hey, y'all, I'm finally settled at my place. Good for you. Everything is put away almost in my home. And yes, I brought as much as I could for my garden. That's awesome. Green stalks are outside filled with ever-bearing strawberries. Well, congratulations on moving into your new place and getting things set up, especially with the strawberries and the green stalk. That's awesome. Joyce says, we're here in the Denver area, too warm and dry for so long. Now got a little cold and some snow, but saw most of the snow going towards my area in Colorado Springs. So yeah, I was right at the edge of the forecast. To 0 to 2 inches was the last forecast that I saw. And I got just a little bit less than 2 inches. And I was expecting the Denver area to get more. So that's the thing about the mountains in Colorado is you have an idea, you have a forecast, but you never really know what you're going to get until you wake up. So let's talk a little bit about that forecast. So having been involved with the weather service in the Air Force and getting to know a lot of the forecasters and understanding how weather forecasting works. First off, when we look at a forecast, and so for most of yesterday, I was at a 50% chance of snow. And looking to Wednesday actually increases. So I've got an 80% chance of snow coming to me in sometime during Wednesday. And it's helpful to understand what that really means. So it's really not a probability. It's not like 50% of the time it will snow, 50% of the time it won't snow. It's not that type of thing. It's it's not a roll of the dice to determine whether you're going to get snow or not. When the forecasters look at in an area and they're trying to determine the likelihood of snow, they actually look at how the weather pattern is going to go through that area and how much of that area is likely to get snow. And so particularly near the Rocky Mountains, when these storms roll through, the likelihood for snow is extremely high in the mountains. And it gets less likely as you move out into the plains. So if you're looking at a given area on a map and say, okay, this weather system is moving through in this area, how much of it is likely to get snow? And imagine a circle, and they draw a line through the circle, and they say, well, it looks like 50% of this area is going to get snow. So then they put out the forecast that says it's a 50% likely snowfall. You could be in that area that is 0%. And so you change your plans. You're thinking there's a 50% chance of snow. I better take care of these activities. And you don't see a single flake because the larger forecast includes your area, but maybe the forecaster knows as well that you're not going to get snow, but the overall area has a 50% chance of getting snow. That's where the weather stations come in, and you can get more precise information. My weather stations are actually networked to other similar stations within my area. And I can go online and I can see all of the other neighbors who have a similar station. And all of us are transmitting our data into the larger network. And we aren't reliant on a forecaster at the National Weather Service. We're actually using the model that these weather stations have developed, and typically they're using the European model. And so it's taking the data from my house and my neighbor's house and someone a couple streets away and someone a couple miles away. And now when I look at my forecast on my phone using my Tempest app, I can see the likelihood of snow, for instance, being much higher than what the National Weather Service might be forecasting, because it's using real-time data based on a network of just people like me that have a station that's part of this weather system, like the underground weather system. And you can get a much more accurate forecast. And so I tend to see that where the National Weather Service will say that there's no rain, no snow, whatever the temperature might be, but my Tempest forecast is different. And quite often, most of the time, my Tempest forecast is more accurate because it's localized. It's localized to my garden, my neighborhood, and much more usable for someone like me who's trying to decide what kind of garden activities are going to take place based on the weather. Big Will Dog says the 6 to 10 day outlook here in Indianapolis says it's going to be colder than average. I hope there's a decent rebound here after that. Yeah, we are definitely under a cold spell. I was visiting my son this last week, and it was 81 degrees Fahrenheit, 27 Celsius when I landed. And even they saw a big cool down, so that it was about 68 degrees, 20 Celsius when I left. And it's stayed pretty cool. And of course, when I got back here to Colorado, it's just been downright cold throughout the weekend. And it's not just me, it's affecting much of the United States. So expect that it's going to be like this for a while. Our hen house says we're up to 10 degrees, minus 12 Celsius. So that's definitely cold. And that's how Eli and I started our chat, because they just published a video where they were lamenting in Scotland that the temperature was getting down to freezing. And some areas had had a recent snowfall. And I sent her a screenshot of my temperatures that were in that 11 to 12 degree Fahrenheit range. So it's all relative, of course, and we all have the varying temperatures that we're exposed to. But it's interesting. I was just having this conversation yesterday with some friends about our weather here in Colorado, because the humidity is so low, it is so dry. I can be outside on a day like today with snow on the ground and just be outside in a long sleeve shirt. I don't need a coat. I don't need any kind of extra warmth. In fact, I've already been outside taking pictures of my garden and didn't put a jacket on because it didn't feel cold. It is cold, measurably cold, but there's no wind blowing. The sun is shining. The humidity is extremely low, and it doesn't feel that cold. You compare that to another region like northern Scotland with the days with less sunlight, much higher humidity, and it just feels colder. Even though the thermometer might be reading higher, it just feels colder. So I look at that. When I decide if I'm going to go outside, I'm looking at the humidity. I'm looking at the wind. I do not like working in my garden when it's windy and cold out. So if I see that the wind is blowing more than about 10 miles an hour, and I see that the humidity is 40% or more, and it's cold, I'm not going outside, because it's going to be that just doesn't feel good kind of temperature. But the wind is calm, and if it's sunny, And if the humidity is in that 15% range, even if the temperature is well below zero, yeah, I can actually work outside. So yeah, you have to get to know your own parameters of what you're willing to do with your work. But that's one way to do it, is to just start tracking it and see what you like and what you prefer. And there are days it's like, what am I going to do today? And I look at the readout. It's like, oh, let's go outside. Let's just walk around, see what's happening in the garden. Pat says, what is your experience with the Coco Raha community? Um, I'm not sure that I know that. So thanks for the contribution as always, Pat. Coco Raha. You may need to give me more information. That is not ringing a bell. Coco Raha. Um, you're going to have to help me out with that, Pat. I may have experience with it, but I am not familiar with that. So for now, I'll say I don't have any experience with it because it's not on the tip of my mind to be able to figure it out. Big Whale Dog says, the only thing my area's cold temps are good for right now is keeping my potatoes and carrots cold, but not freezing. You know, and so I'm starting to monitor that as well. My ground temperature. Now, some weather systems will actually have a probe that you can put into the ground, and it will measure your soil temperature in addition to the air temperature. Most of our weather systems, my weather systems, are air temperature. But my ground isn't frozen yet. I'm definitely monitoring that. And I do have, I think I mentioned that last week, I still have carrots in the ground that I haven't harvested yet. And so that's where that geekiness gets in, where it's not just the air temperature, the soil temperature matters. You've heard me talk about this before, how important the soil temperature is for germination, for growing, and particularly if you still have root vegetables in the ground and you want to try to get them out before it freezes. So look for those kind of information tidbits when you're deciding what you're going to do, particularly as winter approaches. Chandy's Garden is asking, Gardener Scott, I've been busy moving and I got a shipment from MI Gardener of new garlic varieties and flower bulbs. We've had a few freezes. Best to bury them in containers plus mulch or wait now. So it might be best to wait. The issue, particularly with garlic, is that it needs to be exposed to cold temperatures below the 40-degree range, that 4.5 Celsius, for a sustained period of time to allow for that clove to develop into a bulb. So if you can store the garlic in a cool, above freezing location, even your refrigerator, you can plant them in spring as soon as you can work in the soil. And you might expect later than normal that you would get some good bulb development. If you put them in the ground too late, you're running the potential of damaging those cloves. One of the reasons we like to get our garlic in the ground 4 to 6 weeks before the ground freezes is to actually stimulate some of that growth, for those roots to actually begin growing, to tell the clove, I'm in the ground now, I can go dormant. And if you miss that window and you plant too late, the clove isn't in grow mode. It just stays in dormant mode. And depending on how much rain or snow you get and how much it warms up and how much it cools down, you could run into issues where the cloves just get cellular damage or end up rotting over time, particularly in the springtime, and you're not going to get any growth at all. So delaying a little bit until the ground starts thawing out again and you can get those cloves in the ground might be best. If you can put them in a nice cool container with mulch, absolutely, or consider putting them in your refrigerator. And the same with the flower bulbs. If you get the bulbs in too late, you can run the risk of those bulbs not growing at all and actually end up rotting in the ground once the ground starts thawing in spring. So I have a few bulbs that I didn't get in the ground, and that's what I'm doing. I'm just waiting until springtime, because I've put them in the ground in December before and nothing happens for me. because of the type of weather I have. So it is a decision to weigh what specific conditions you're going to have over the course of the winter versus the stability of just keeping those kind of things in storage. And that can definitely make a big difference. So congratulations, Owen. I finally got a tomato growing on an heirloom I started from seed last spring. So good for you. That's always fun when you save your own seeds and start letting them have an opportunity, and then you can get a tomato growing on them. So congratulations. Brian says 1 foot of snow in south central Wisconsin. Yay, that's incredible. Only 19 inches all last winter, normally around 50 inches. Lost some biennials and perennials last year from lack of snow. Yeah, that's another factor when we talk about putting bulbs in the ground or actually having plants in the ground, is snow is wonderful. First off, it's an insulator, so it keeps the temperature much more stable, the soil temperature much more stable. And then also it helps maintain a more consistent moisture level. The biggest issue I have in winter when we don't have any snow is that the ground dries out. And that's another reason that you should consider avoiding putting in cloves or bulbs. If the soil is going to dry out, then you're going to desiccate those bulbs, and the snow helps mitigate that. It helps protect the ground and keep some of those moisture levels more consistent for the bulbs and the perennials. And it may necessitate winter watering. I've talked about that a couple of times in recent weeks. The idea being that in winter, when it's dry, when you don't have that snow cover, the ground's going to dry out and your plants are going to be affected, and you may need to get out and water in the middle of winter on a day that gets above about 40 degrees Fahrenheit and the sun is shining. Yeah, water those perennials, water those biennials, keep that soil from drying out. And that's one way to avoid losing some of the biennials and the perennials over the course of a winter, particularly when you're not getting the snow. But 1 foot of snow, it's been a while since we've seen something like that. Danny says we got somewhere around 1 foot of snow between Friday and Saturday here in Iowa. I knew it was coming, so I filled a bed with compost and spread milkweed seeds for a milkweed bed in the spring. Awesome. I hope you get some monarch butterflies. The snow on the ground, I talked about this in a video I made a long time ago about fall sowing of seeds. And I like snow sowing because it's kind of a way for me to see where the seeds are. So on a day like today, when I just got a little bit of snow and I got some seeds that I still need to sow, some perennial seeds and annual seeds, I'll go out and just toss them in the snow, and I can see exactly where they land. And then as the snow melts, the seeds settle down on the soil. And when the temperature finally warms up in spring, the seeds will germinate. Not all of them. Between the birds and the insects and just the basic weather conditions that the garden endures, a lot of the fall and winter sown seeds aren't going to germinate and make it through the year, but enough will that I think it's worthwhile. And so I like that idea of creating a milkweed bed this time of year when you've got a lot of snow on the ground. It actually makes a lot of sense. And it's easy. You just kind of let nature do all the work after you've spread it out. So Split Creek Homestead, hello to you too. Thanks for being here today. And it's always nice to see the crowd and new people checking in and the old regulars checking in. Big Will Dog has a question. Should I worry about moisture if I put a tarp over my potted plants, mostly garlic, to overwinter? So yeah, I worry. I don't like to use the term worry in my garden. Am I concerned? Am I aware? Is it going to cause me to take a particular course of action? Like I just talked about, the moisture concerns, particularly in a potted plant, is about it drying out. And so as I've grown garlic and other plants in containers and overwintered them, If they were covered, they could still dry out. And so covering is only one piece of the winter protection. You still need to monitor the soil moisture levels. So yes, you should be concerned about that. You should be monitoring it. And periodically, you will probably need to water. Now, the tarp is going to help hold in some of that moisture, but depending on your humidity, especially if you're, like me in Colorado, where our humidity is so low, even mulch covering the ground, even a tarp over a pot, the air is so dry that it's going to basically turn that pot into a dust bowl if you don't get out there and water. So look for those kind of considerations in deciding what you need to do. But yeah, the tarp will help protect the plant from some of those extremes, particularly the wind blowing through. It'll help raise the temperature a few degrees over the course of each night, and it might make the difference in whether your bulbs will survive or not, or whether your garlic cloves will survive. But the moisture level of the soil is definitely important and something that you need to be aware of. Shandy's Garden says, so what's the difference between letting them sit out in the shed in their box nice and cold and being planted? It's because they need the water and the soil nutrients even when dormant. So no, when dormant, the soil nutrients don't matter at all. The nutrients are only applicable when the plant is actively growing, when the roots are alive and growing and absorbing those nutrients. Nutrients really don't matter at all when a plant is dormant. The key is the moisture levels. And so when you put a bulb into sawdust or compost or straw or sand in a box in a garage, it tends to be a little more stable. And depending on if you've moistened it lightly, which is usually the case when you first put something into storage like that, it tends to stay a little more consistently moist. Whereas soil outdoors, exposed to the wind, exposed to the sun, is much more likely to dry out. So that's a big reason why we will store in a protected environment like a garage or a shed, because it doesn't have those external weather factors that are going to dry out the soil. Has nothing to do with the nutrients, which is why you can store in sand and sawdust over the course of a winter. It's more just the consistency of the moisture level that bulb is being exposed to. You don't want it to be wet, but you don't want it to be dry. You do want some moisture level in that storage container so that it just doesn't desiccate and dry out and crumble in your hands in the spring when you definitely want to be ready to harvest or be ready to plant, and then you can't because it died during its dormant period. So Serena's asking, how much does a Tempest weather station cost? You can click on the link below and find out. They have a couple different models and a couple different options. So click on the link below and you can find out exactly what it is. I think they're having some sales right now, so I don't want to give you a cost because I honestly haven't looked recently to see what their current cost is. But I think they're probably still doing some Black Friday sales. But yeah, click on the link below and that'll give you an idea. And then of course you could use the Gardener Scott code and get a discount on it as well. But I've got the Tempest with a mount that attaches to my shed, and you can get different kinds of mounts to put it on a post, to put it on a fence, and that will affect the cost depending on how you want to mount it and which system you want to get. So yeah, go ahead and check that out to get a better answer as to what it might really be. Okay, so the CocoRa's network of backward weather observers. I am aware of that. And there's welcome to the Cocoa Raz. Okay. Volunteers working together to measure precipitation across the nations. Thank you for spelling that out a little bit. And there's Jay saying that it's a community of global volunteer-based citizen scientists who measure and report daily weather. The Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't have any experience with that. I did become aware of them a few years ago. Before I got my Tempest station, I was looking at getting a certified weather collector, one of those big plastic containers that you would put on a post that has the graduated scale to be able to measure the snow and the rain. So I looked into doing that, and then I decided to get the Tempest weather station instead. So I do not have experience with them, and I am not part of that collaboration, but I love the idea. And what I'm doing is similar with my weather station network, where we have the data available between all of us. If you go into the app and you can search and get that kind of information, I can actually pull up a map and I can see where the stations are in my neighborhood with real-time readouts. So it's similar. There are a lot of those volunteer networks that are part of the weather community. So thank you, the Cocoa Raz. I like that. You guys taught me something today, so I do appreciate it. Kevin is saying, me too, don't like working in the wind. In Kentucky Zone 7A, the relative humidity is around 84% and 6 miles per hour, making the temperature lower than it is. Yeah, when you got that high humidity and the wind, it's just not enjoyable. And I try to avoid it as every opportunity, which means there's a lot of indoor days when the wind starts peaking up a little bit. So Zookeeper says, I have seeds that need cold stratification in the freezer until February. That's how I started a poppy seed bed this past summer. Good for you. The cold stratification, I've talked about that every now and then, about cold stratifying in your refrigerator or your freezer. The winter sowing that I was just talking about a few minutes ago, that's cold stratifying. That achieves the same kind of thing. I do it all. I've got seed packets in my refrigerator right now, ready to go to start germinating here very, very soon. December, actually, it's December already. I was waiting until December. Now it's December. I guess it's time for me to start germinating some seeds. But when we cold stratify in our refrigerator or freezer, we're basically just trying to mimic the conditions of nature. So if you live in an area like me that nature provides those cool, cold, and freezing conditions, you just spread the seeds on the snow and you're giving them the natural cold stratification. So it depends on the seed, of course, whether it's a plant that I'm going to pot up and grow like an herb, or whether it is something that I can just let grow within my pollinator garden. But consider each of those as an option, depending on what it is you're growing. If it's something that you want control over, then absolutely. Do it inside, do it in your own grow area, and that's the kind of thing that will make a difference in the selection. All of my herbs, I cold stratify, start indoors, and then put them outside when the weather is warm enough. And almost all of my annuals, like the Cosmos, when I save the seed, I just toss them wildly and let them pop up wherever they're going to pop up. So it adds a little bit of variation within your gardening. Serena's asking, can I still plant carrots or should I wait until March? You can definitely still plant carrots. You can plant carrots any time of year. This is one of those things where even though carrots can handle cold temperatures, don't expect that you're going to get any germination. If you're in an area that gets a cold winter and you're already experiencing nights below freezing, you can definitely put the carrot seeds in your garden, but don't expect that they're going to germinate until the temperatures warm up in spring. So the winter sowing, it doesn't have to be flowers. It doesn't have to be the annuals and the perennials. You can definitely winter sow your vegetable garden and put the seeds in your vegetable beds. And then when the soil warms up to the point where those seeds will germinate, they'll start growing. I had that happen last year with my cilantro. I grew cilantro, I let it go to seed. A lot of that seed fell to the ground, and I just left those seeds in place on the bed. And I had cilantro, which is normally considered a warm season plant. You're growing it in the summer alongside your tomatoes and your peppers. I had cilantro that was germinating in March here in my Colorado garden. It was still very cold out, but the soil temperature had warmed up to the point that the cilantro seeds were starting to develop into plants. And I was harvesting cilantro in my garden weeks before I was putting any other seeds in my garden beds, because essentially I had done winter sowing of those seeds. So yeah, you can definitely do it with your vegetable garden. Most of the things we're growing in our vegetable garden don't need cold stratification, but the cold is not going to kill them. And it just helps you get the seeds in place a little bit early and let nature deal with the germination issues. Hello, Tony. Tony from Simplified Gardening has joined us. It's always nice when you pop in on Mondays, and always nice to see you. Brian says, another bonus with the foot of snow, the squirrels were not emptying my bird feeders. That's good. You're exactly right. I don't know that I've ever talked to anybody about that. You're exactly right. If you're having an issue with your squirrels and your bird feeders, they're not going to be coming out in foot deep snow to get to your bird feeders. So there's a deterrence. If you want to keep the squirrels out, just move to an area where you get a lot of snow. Food Forest Permaculture says, sure, great topics, Gardener Scott. Well, thank you for that. Great days, fellow earthlings. So great days ahead to you as well. And I appreciate you saying that. I always try to come up with topics that very few others are talking about. That's one of those things about gardening, and my philosophy about gardening is it's more than just how to grow tomatoes, how to grow peppers. The world of gardening is so extensive. There's so much to learn. There's so much to know. None of us can even come close to knowing everything. It's just a matter of which areas bring you the most interest and what you learn to like about gardening. And I like so much about gardening, including weather data, that I like to share, because there might be someone else out there that's like, oh, I never thought about that. Yeah, tracking my weather and seeing what the patterns are, and then allowing that information to influence how I garden. What a concept. So thank you for saying that, because different topics have different levels of interest to different gardeners. Exposing all of us to these different ideas is something I like to do. Sandy's Garden says, I'm really, really wanting a Tempest weather station next. Santa already knows. Awesome. When I set it up for my area, does it load or no other nearby stations information? I know it saves mine. Yeah, so you can set it up for, and I'm trying to remember, and actually the network that you all were just talking about, I know that when I was setting up my weather station, that I had the option to link into a number of different weather networks. So that's all part of the setup. When you load your data and you have it linked to your whole network, is you can decide how to share it, or if you share it at all, or if you keep it private. Most weather stations have that option. And I forget exactly how the Tempest does that, but you can go through the app and make those determinations. and particularly, I think when I was setting it up for the forecast, I was able to choose which network data I was going to allow for the forecast. So it really does become a localized forecast. And then, of course, it saves your own. So that's all part with the setup. I don't remember exactly which networks were offered as potential. Weather Underground is pretty available all over. And then you can also go to the Weather Network, and a lot of them will allow you to tie in to them. So the Tempest might not necessarily send the information direct, but you could also then link to an organization that uses your data in setting up a weather network. So lots of different options, whether you do it on the weather station side or whether you do it on the network side. You should be able to find a way that you would like participating. So, and there's that link. Thank you, Jay. Yeah, 10% off the Tempest if you use the Gardner Scott code. And I'm always looking for a way to save money. That's a good option if you're interested in it. And yeah, that's true. If you're interested and you're not ready, let your family know that you're interested. If they haven't got your Christmas gift yet, that could be an option. Myra says, in your windy area, do you have issues with stability of your green stalks when they're on the spinner base with the wheels? So no, I don't. And I did discover, so when I put the new green stalks in my garden outside, when I filmed the video, I did a video a few months ago where I was talking about adding the green stalk colors in my garden. I shot that video before I had fully filled the green stalks. And I can tell you, an empty green stalk will blow over. And I experienced that. A half-filled green stalk. So if you have a green stalk that might be like a 6-tier system, and you've only got the 3 bottom tiers filled, and the top 3 are empty, those top 3 will blow over in the wind. But once they're filled, then they don't blow over. I haven't had that issue at all. And especially when you start watering and you add the weight of the water, it basically centralizes the weight, and it's distributed around the center core, and it's very stable. If you lock the wheels, I did have an issue with one of the green stalks that I had outside my back door. I hadn't locked the wheels, and it would roll in the wind. But once I locked the wheels, it was stable. So I've never had a green stalk, and I've been growing in them for years now. I keep them outside during the winter, never had a green stalk blow over. And I know, measurable because of my weather systems, I've had 75-mile-an-hour gusts in my garden, and the green stalks were stable, never blew over, except for when they were empty. So the key is the weight. The design is such, particularly the round design, that the wind just flows around it, and it really doesn't hit full broad-sided force. And so I wouldn't be concerned about that at all. I haven't noticed it spinning. Even with the spinner base, they don't spin in the wind. But if you don't lock the wheels, they might roll a little bit, but perfectly stable. Absolutely no issues with my green stalks in my wind. And it actually works pretty good. Lisa says, I've had cilantro sprouting too in Southwest Colorado. I think it loves the cooler weather. Yeah, I was actually surprised at how well my cilantro did in the cool weather. I mean, who knew? And I have since learned that it is a cool season plant. You know, it bolts. I know it bolts in summer, and it's one of those things when we start thinking about how we grow plants versus the plant type. Because I make salsa, and I grow tomatoes, and I grow peppers, I grow cilantro with my tomatoes. And so, you know, we talk ourselves into thinking about the plants in a way that's different from the plant that we're actually growing. So I'm growing cilantro when it's warm out, and in the middle of summer it bolts, and then I collect the seeds, and it likes the cool weather. But which is it? Is it a cool season plant or is it a warm season plant? I grow it like a warm season plant. But last year when I started seeing it and I looked it up and I saw what the germination temperatures were, and you can see charts like this if you search for them online, you can find out that there are a lot of these plants that we're growing as warm season plants that are really cool season plants, and that they will germinate in very cold soil temperatures. Spinach seeds can actually germinate when the temperature is just a couple degrees above freezing. Now, it may take weeks for them to germinate, but there's a lot of those plants that really are cool season plants that we just grow as a warm season plant, and then they bolt, and then we complain that they bolted. Well, start growing them earlier in the season, and then if it's a plant that you can preserve, then save it for later on. Now, cilantro doesn't preserve very well, which is why I grow it as a warm season plant to go in my salsas. But yeah, there's a lot of herbs like that that will pop up. My thyme, my sage, they're perennial plants, and they're sprouting and growing and showing their green leaves very early in the season. So it's kind of surprising when you look at that kind of stuff. Let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and scroll down here a little bit. Yeah, EMKN says, because cilantro isn't a warm season plant, it's a cool season plant. There you go, thank you. And no one says, depends on your climate. Cilantro will bolt immediately in my summer. There you go. So what I started doing this year to avoid that bolting cycle is I essentially grew cilantro in spring and I grew cilantro in fall. And it actually matched up very well with my later season tomatoes. So I did the same thing with basil. I had basil in my greenhouse. So I was enjoying tomatoes with basil or tomatoes with cilantro in my salsa late in the season and didn't have to worry about the bolting. I mean, I had bolting from those spring plants, but yeah, understanding how the cool season and warm season kind of gets mixed up a little bit, it's kind of fun to relearn what maybe you had already known and had just kind of forgotten in time because you let yourself get into a habit. And we do that so often with a lot of the squirrels that are not, I would just saw the squirrels here a little bit. We do that so often with so many of the plants we're growing in the garden. Jay says, Canadian squirrels, our squirrels are out all winter in deep snow. They use tunnels, but hunker down more. Yeah, the squirrels will definitely take advantage of that cover, particularly in the winter. They don't want the predators to see them, of course. Let's see, Brian says, have a great week, everyone. Take a moment, remember December 7th. Stay well for you as well, Brian. Thank you for that. Dennis says, I remember when I lived in Sparks, Nevada, getting 18 inches of partly cloudy. They predicted partly cloudy skies and got 18 inches of snow. I lived in Sparks, Nevada for much of my youth, and I did not follow the weather back then. I did not know about the forecasts, but yes, I have been waiting for the bus in a lot of partly cloudy conditions with my feet buried in snow in Sparks, Nevada. So thank you for reminding me of those many years ago. Cheryl says, in Maine, I have this random Brussels sprout plant that has come back for 4 winters. Last year, we made it to -21 and was surprised it still made it, totally neglected. Wow, that's a durable plant. I know they can handle some really cold conditions, but that's awesome. That's the kind of one that you save seeds from, so you make sure that you're always able to grow it. Mobius says, you know, there are good tips for reliable weather forecasts. Share what you use. Mine, Weather Underground, there you go, has been less than reliable since the NOAA cuts. Good to know. Interesting. Yeah, and that's, you know, that, and the online electronic linkage, particularly with other similar weather home stations, might be able to give you a little more accurate information, because the professional forecasting system is definitely being affected by budget cuts and modifications in how they do stuff. So let's see, the Dusty Flash says the electronic delay in reporting to tornadoes is something to always keep in mind. It's about 5 minutes. Good point. You know, and it's interesting. My Tempest actually reports lightning strikes to me. And I was amazed, particularly during one thunderstorm last year, that I was looking at it, and it was telling me about the lightning strikes real time within this thunderstorm. And so I haven't encountered a tornado in recent years, and haven't used my weather station for tornado reporting. But yeah, I do know just with my system that I can see the wind, I can see the humidity, I can see the temperature, I can see the lightning strikes, and that might be enough information to actually give you a fair amount of warning, not necessarily for a tornado development, but at least for the trending of a particular storm, to see if it's increasing or dissipating with the strength of the storm. And if you know about tornadoes and how they're formed, and the building stage of a thunderstorm, the cumulonimbus cloud, yeah, you might be able to determine some of that stuff minutes before it's actually reported, which could be important if you live in Tornado Alley. That's something to think about. Let's see, I'm trying to catch up a little bit. Francois asking, hi Scott, hello back to you. Do you know if Tempest work with the Canadian weather? So I'm pretty sure they ship to Canada. I can't tell you about a network that they might be linked in with Canada, but check them out. Click on the link and go to their site. And I'm sure that that's in their frequently asked questions section. And you can probably find information about how they link with the Canadian systems. But that's a good question. And that's one of those things, definitely check ahead of time. If you're going to geek out like me, ask the question of whatever it is. The first weather station I got a long time ago, just purchased off Amazon, was very cheap, did its job for the most part for a couple years, and very little information about it. Obviously, you know, it had been shipped from China, and the instructions were virtually useless. I would encourage, like Tempest, that, you know, a company that has much more support, much more information, and that you can get the answers beforehand. And that's the difference between buying you know, a really cheap system and maybe investing a little bit in a more robust system, getting those answers ahead of time. Tony says, I'd love to get a couple green stocks to replace the smaller versions I have, and ideal if they have the drip included. Greenstock does have the drip system. I don't know what they've got in the UK yet, Tony. I haven't been able to get any. Well, Greenstock, I've asked them a couple times on your behalf. They just don't know what's happening with the green stocks in the UK. But the drip system is definitely a possibility if you either make your own, or maybe you can find someone who's starting to distribute them. Let's see. Oh, I ended up going backwards. LCM says, great information about the green stock stability. I've wondered and assumed it would be a problem for my windy deck. Really good to know. Yeah, I don't. So I have a deck. So I actually have planks, and the space between the planks actually, I think, kind of helps lock in those wheels, and so that's why it doesn't move very quickly. And I've seen a little bit going back and forth. I haven't read everything about the green stocks, but thank you to everyone who is passing on that information. Myra says, thank you to Karen and to me. The base with wheels is on sale, so I'll be making that purchase. Awesome. Yeah, I like the spinner base. I've got the wheels without the spinner base. I like the wheels with the spinner base personally, because it allows me to move it and it allows me to spin it easily. On my deck, kind of what I was just talking about, because of those little gaps between the planks, it's a little bit harder to spin. I mean, for me to actually physically manhandle and turn the green stock isn't easy. It can be done, but because the wheels kind of lock into those gaps, it takes a little bit more effort to turn the wheels, which is why I prefer the spinner base, because the spinner base just turns and the wheels are locked and I don't have to worry about it all over. So Bettina says a green stock will blow over on a deck. It did on ours. Now it's positioned in a covered corner on our concrete patio. So interesting, good to know that. I wonder how strong the wind was, because I haven't heard that as an issue from very many people, that it has blown over, and it could be the height. My first green stock, I only got 5 tiers because I was concerned about it blowing over and had no issues. Then my second green stock was a 6 tier, no issues. And then I went with a 7 tier leaf system, absolutely no issues. So a lot of it, again, it gets back to your particular weather, monitoring your wind. And if you notice a pattern that when the wind hits a certain point, your green stock is going to move, potentially blow over, then move it next to your house, move it to a protected area so you don't have that issue. That's the nice thing about the wheels, is you can move the green stocks into a protected area if you need to. So I can't believe how the time flies. So I'm trying to scroll through and catch up a little bit. Karen says, Gardener Scott, are new leaves on perennial herbs still good? I read the taste of some are affected after flowering or other events. So depending on the herb, but yes, herbs, the leaves, if it's an herb that you're saving to use the leaves, you can discern a difference at different stages of the life. So a brand new leaf is going to taste different than a fully mature leaf. And for some plants, basil is probably the most pronounced and the one that people talk most about. Yes, if your basil flowers, the newer leaves, at least what I've noticed, and I've also read this as well, will taste different. So once the plant gets into flower mode, then the flavors are going to taste different for the leaves. So it's probably most pronounced in basil plants, and I've noticed it the most. I haven't noticed it as much in thyme, because I'll still harvest thyme after it has flowered, and those young thyme leaves still taste like thyme to me. It's an intense flavor, so maybe it's not as noticeable if there might be a slight difference. I've noticed sage as well. Sage, I'll harvest sage leaves, newer sage leaves after it's flowered, and it still tastes like sage. But the basil in particular, and even the cilantro leaves will taste different after it has started flowering. So it depends. They're still good. You can still use them. You just might notice that there's a difference in taste. And so taste them before you rely on them if you're making a recipe that requires something along those lines. And experiment a little bit with it to see whether you like the taste after it's reached its own point. Sandy says, we made our own drip system as shown in Planter's video. Ran a tube up the center so it can still rotate. Works great. Good to know. that's the issue when the new automated system came out for the green stock, and it wasn't a drip system. It was like a little nozzle that sprayed into the reservoir. Works great, but that's the biggest issue, is being able to rotate. And so running up a central tube, like videos that you can find in the planter site, can definitely make a difference if you have the plants that you need to keep turning over. Zookeeper says, I have 6 green stalks on elevated porch and no issues with toppling over. Keep the wheels locked. Don't go more than 1 level over the height of the railing, and put in corners where able. There you go. Good suggestions for that as well. And yeah, I keep mine a little bit closer to the house during the really winter or windy times. And even when they've been caught outside on the open deck, I haven't had an issue either. Uh, let's see, Robin says, I've only had my green stock one season, but we get some significant winds. I have mine on the spinner wheel based. I keep wheels locked, no issues. Thank you. There you go. So for the most part, it sounds like it's a pretty stable system. And just be aware that a few people have had them blow over, probably in very extreme windy conditions. Mine that are outside and filled are still doing great. Haven't blown over in any of these fall weather systems that have been rolling through, and I'm happy for that. The other thing I wanted to mention when we talk about the reason you might want to have a weather system in your garden is springtime. You know, right now I'm thinking winter, I'm thinking snow, I'm thinking tracking what's actually happening with the bad weather that's coming. The good weather is another good reason to have a system to see in springtime when the nights are going to be above freezing, when the nights are going to be above that important threshold, that 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. That's an important number in our garden, because when it starts getting above that threshold, it's time to put your tomato plants outside, and your squash and your aubergine and peppers. Those are the plants that you want to get in the ground when the nighttime temperatures are warm. Well, you might be getting up in the morning if you're a late sleeper and you look at your thermometer and it's warm. Well, a weather system can tell you what the temperature was over the course of the whole night. And so I'll get up in the morning and I'll go, oh, wow, wonderful, warm night. And then I look at the data over the course of the last 8 hours when I was sleeping, and I might see that, no, the nights aren't as warm as I think they are, because at 2 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock, it's still below freezing. It's still cold. And those are the days when I start monitoring my soil temperature and I start tracking to see what's happening with all of those temperatures combined, the air temperature and the soil temperature. And when I start to see that warming trend, when it gets to that threshold, that minimum threshold for me, that's when I start looking at the weekly forecast or the 10-day forecast to see, are the conditions going to stay this good? So yeah, my temperatures at night stay above freezing, but is that an anomaly, or are we now in a weather trend where the pattern has changed and now the rest of the days are going, or rest of the nights are going to be above freezing? And so the data collection that you have can really become important to save yourself from having to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and see what's happening within your garden. You can just pull out your app and see what the data collection works or looks like. I'm waiting, and so I'll throw this out to you, Tony, just to think about. I'm waiting for a planning app or a planting app that actually ties into a weather station app. So, you know, planning apps can be set up that based on your hardiness zone, or based on your latitude, or based on your zip code, they'll give you information about what you should plant and when you should plant. I see the day coming when we can actually tie in something like our Tempest weather station with its data into a planting app, so that if we're trying to decide, should I put those seeds in the ground, should I put my tomatoes outside, you pull out your app and it gives you real-time, accurate information to include the weekly forecast. And you say, yeah, today's the perfect day to sow my garden because the weather's going to stay good and the temperatures are going to be above what I need for a minimum. I haven't come across an app like that yet, but I anticipate that it's coming. And I think that would be an incredible addition to our gardening toolboxes. Because how easy is that? When we are setting up our planting calendar, right now it's, as I've shown in a number of my videos, a calendar. This is the date based on my average last frost in spring. This is the date that I'm planning to sow my seeds. This is the date that I'm planning to transplant. Well, wouldn't it be wonderful as you are approaching that date to be able to look at your phone and say, is it time to plant? And the answer comes back, yes. Maybe a week early, maybe 5 days early. For someone like me with a short season, getting an extra 5 days can make a huge difference. So if I come across a system like that, I will definitely let you know, but I think that's important. Sandy says, planter uses an average frost date, but it doesn't adjust based on current info. It would be cool if an app could do that. Exactly, and that's what I'm talking about. And I use the planter app, and it's exactly that. You enter in your zip code, you enter in where you're actually growing, and planter does a great job of setting up that basic calendar. But it's still up to us to do that extra step of looking at the forecast, of measuring our soil temperature, of seeing what's actually happening within our individual garden. So as smart as the home systems are becoming, it's going to happen. It's just a question of when it's going to happen. And I'm looking forward to that. I think it'd actually be pretty cool if we can get to a point where, I mean, I like being hands-on. I've said that repeatedly. I love being hands-on in my garden, but I'm also a relatively lazy gardener. And if I don't have to do all the research and the research is handed to me and I know it's accurate, well, then I'm willing to accept that that could be one of those things that I'll benefit from and maybe use on a relatively regular basis. By making it easy. Shandy's Gardens asking, do you have any experience with Seed Time? It's an amazing tool that I haven't purchased yet. There's a free version, but the planning and the designing is amazing. I don't know Seed Time, so maybe someone else can tell you something about it, but I don't know about Seed Time. I'll have to look into that. Lyra Gardner says, sorry, what was the name of the personal weather station that Gardner Scott recommends again? Brain fog today. It's the Tempest. I've got a link to it below. The Tempest system, and the thing I like about the Tempest. So the other weather station I have is battery operated, and I've had to replace the batteries. You know, it gets so cold in my area. You have to be careful what kind of batteries you're going to put into your weather station when your temperatures get as cold as they get here in Colorado. The Tempest has no batteries, no moving parts, no replacements of anything in the system. It actually has a solar panel, a grid of solar, not full-fledged solar panels, but little solar windows, I'm not sure what you would call those, that are part of the weather station. And so when you put it in place, you have to orient it to the correct position based on where the sun is. And it works in winter because it's pointed directly at the sun. No batteries. It's so easy to use. And that was one of the selling factors for me, was a solar powered weather station. And I get so much sun and have never had an issue with it. And even in low sun conditions, it's still enough to charge up the battery. So it's the Tempest, and that's what I've got the link for below, because it's so easy. You know, the weather system, when I was talking about at the beginning of the show, the two systems and how the one is noticeably different, I think it's because the batteries are starting to fail because the temperatures have started to change. So I'm gonna have to get out and change the batteries, and hopefully that'll bring it back up to more accurate readings. But the Tempest, I put it up. It's been a couple years now. Don't even have to worry about it. It essentially is self-cleaning because the rain and the wind are enough to clean off the solar panel. I've never had to go up and clean off those little solar sensors. So it's virtually foolproof and very easy to use. Bowtie Life is saying, Governor Scott, when I get the budget for it, I'm planning a Tempest weather station. Cool. I'll use your link, of course. Oh yeah, definitely. Got to save the money every time you can get the option. Dusty Flat says, I have an Accurite weather station. It's been good for the last couple of years. I looked into Accurite. So Accurite has some good ratings as well. That's good to know. John is wondering, do you think the Tempest weather station would work in the UK with our dull gray and wet winters? So the wet isn't an issue. And like I was just saying, the shorter days and the cloudy days, that's a question I would pose to the Tempest website, because I don't want to say that it will work. I will say that we will have periods of a week or two where it's overcast and snowy, and for 2 weeks worth of very little sunlight in the middle of winter, my Tempest still works fine. It still broadcasts the signal. It still gives me accurate readings. So all I can say is in a 2-week run, I haven't noticed any issues. Now, here in Colorado, we rarely have more than a 2-week period before sun shows up again. And it only takes a little bit of sun to fully charge it, of course. So I can't give you an exact answer. I would suspect, because it's multiple solar panels, it actually is like covers 180 degrees of it. So it's getting the full sky. I would guess that it gets enough sun to keep the batteries operating at least at the minimal levels. But that's definitely a question to see if you can find through the facts if you look up the Tempest, just to be sure. And that's probably appropriate for anything. If you're using solar batteries or solar systems for anything else in the UK, how do those systems work? I noticed my solar powered lights that I have in my garden, the lights in summer stay lit throughout the entire night. So they'll charge up during the day, and then I have the lights operating, and in the morning when I get up, the lights are still on. I have noticed in the last couple days that a few of the lights aren't staying on all night long. So when I get up in the morning, some of the lights have already discharged the battery. Now, a light, I don't know how much energy it requires versus how much energy a Tempest weather station or a similar solar powered station would require. You might notice something like that. During the deepest, darkest days of winter, maybe in the early morning, there might be an issue where you're not getting as accurate information. Maybe it's not transmitting, but as soon as the sun rises, even on a cloudy day, you should get enough light. But that's a guess. So that's a guess that is how it would work. But yeah, definitely ask the question and see if that's something that you could be aware of. Serena's asking, where do you keep your weather station, and do you have to keep it from getting wet? No, you want it to get wet. You want it to stay right out in the elements, because it measures your rainfall as well. And in fact, it's incredible. The Tempest, it has like a little flat, slightly curved top, and it measures the rainfall. And whatever algorithm it uses is incredible, because it will like measure the raindrops that hit it and the frequency of those raindrops, and apparently the weight of those raindrops. And that's how it determines how much rain you get. Most weather stations actually have a cup that collects the rain, and that's how it determines how much rain fell. Well, between my two weather stations, the Tempest, that has no canister to collect the rain is much more accurate at how much rain has fallen than the other weather station that actually has the little canister that collects the water. I mean, it's crazy how that works. But no, it's outside. It's exposed to the snow, it's exposed to the rain, it's exposed to the sun. You want to keep your weather station so that it can get wet, so that you know how much rain you get. That's one of the things you want to measure in your garden. And if particularly in the springtime, you're trying to decide, should I water my garden today? That's another reason for having a weather station. You can pull up the information and see how much rain you got, and you may not have to water. Or you think, and this is how I've used it. Oh, it rained. Do I need to water? Then I check the data and it's like, oh, we barely got any rain at all. Even though we got rain, I have to go out and water my garden. So one of those little extra things to think about when it comes to how you're going to choose your gardening activities. Rain is a factor, and yes, put your sensor out so that it can get the rain and you can help make that decision. So amazing where the time goes on our Mondays. Next week, I had mentioned recently that I was going to be doing a show talking about growing a YouTube channel, how a gardening channel works, how the Gardener Scott channel has developed in time, how I do my videos, and anything else that you might be interested in. Next week, I'll do that show. So if you're a small channel and interested in growing, or if you know someone that has a small channel that's interested in growing on YouTube, be sure you tune in next Monday. And even if you don't have a channel and you're just interested in how all of this YouTube world works, join us next Monday at all. And I'll be answering all the questions I can. I'll give you as much background as I can on my channel. If Tony happens to be there, no doubt he'll be willing to share information as well if he can. So learn more about YouTube and videos and growing a channel and all that fun stuff next week on our Gardener Scott Monday live stream. It's always good to be here, always great to see you all. I hope those of you that celebrated Thanksgiving last week had a wonderful holiday. I had a fantastic time with my son's family, and it's hard to believe that December is here. So stay warm. If you're in a cold area, if you're in a warm area, enjoy being in a warm area. And I'll see you here next Monday. Enjoy gardening.